Jim here with Eaglebear Bikes, and today I'm going to show you how to assemble an Eaglebear Black. Alright, so with the bike out of the box and unpacked, we're ready to start assembly. So I like to sit the bike down just like this, so resting on the fork legs and the back tire. And the first thing that I'm going to do for assembly is install the handlebar. That's just so that the handlebar doesn't dangle around while I'm trying to do the rest of the assembly. Alright, so in your parts box there's going to be a small multi-tool. On the multi-tool you're going to want to select the 4mm hex key. It will say 4mm, it's engraved pretty small there. If you can't see that, you just need to find the hex key that's going to fit in the 4 bolts on the stem. So we're just going to start unthreading those bolts. Now this last bolt, I like to leave this in the stem as a reference point when I take it out. So on the stem, you can see right here it says no gap. I'm not sure how well you can see it on the screen, but you'll be able to read on your stem in person. So right here it says no gap, and then there's a small arrow on the corner of the stem body here. So you want to make sure that those two match up. You don't want to flip the faceplate into a different orientation. And then lift your handlebar up into the stem, and you'll see the center mark. So that's really just like an indication to get started. You might have to roll the handlebar back and forth after it's installed. I'm going to slide this in again, making sure that I have the no gap matched up with the arrow. And then I'm just going to kind of finger thread that in there. And then just go through and start the rest of your bolts. So I like to just get these started by hand rather than a tool, just so that I make sure that I'm grabbing the thread properly and not cross-threading anything. You don't want to put a tool on it and force. You just want to make sure that the bolt's threaded nice and smoothly. Okay, and now I'm going to get my handlebar kind of in the position I want. But you'll have multiple chances to reposition the handlebar as you're tightening it. Okay, so this stem, that no gap, what that means is as you're tightening it, on a traditional stem, you would leave a gap between the stem body and the faceplate on the top and the bottom. And while you're tightening it, you would be trying to equalize the gap. Since this stem calls for no gap, the first thing you're going to do is close that gap at the top. So you're going to fully tighten these top 2 bolts. So while I'm getting that kind of snug, I'm going to get this centered up here and start getting that tight. And then the handlebar gets a little bit harder to move, but it stays in position now. So now I'm going to take this as an opportunity to get my handlebar where I want. So I'm going to adjust it kind of from side to side and also roll it forward. When you get the front wheel on, you might end up at the very end wanting to reposition your handlebar based on your own preference. But what I like to do is try to get the brake levers at about 45 degrees from level ground. That's just a good starting point, and any preference beyond that you can set up yourself. Okay, so now the second bolt, I'm going to drive this all the way in. So I'm not torquing these bolts down yet, I'm just getting them snug. Okay, so make sure the top 2 bolts are tight. And then you can move on to the bottom 2 bolts. And again, this gap is totally closed at the top. There's no gap between the faceplate and the stem body at the top. If you look underneath, there's a pretty significant gap. You could put the whole hex key in there. All right, so I'm going to move and start tightening up these bottom 2 bolts. Okay, and now with everything snug, what I like to do is get the multi-tool into an L shape here instead of just driving it like this. This just gets me some leverage for when I'm tightening the bolts. And go ahead and torque down your bolts. You'll be able to get about 1/8 to 1/4 turn out. If you're applying any more force than that, you can strip out the stem, so you don't want to go too crazy. So on these, I only got about 1/8 of a turn. And on the bottom 2, I got closer to 1/4 turn. All right, and that's it. Handlebar's installed. All right, so now we're ready to install our front wheel. So on your multi-tool, there's going to be the largest hex key. So there's an 8mm on there. That's just an adapter. So that adapter can get pulled off and set aside, and then there'll be a 6mm hex key underneath it. So we're going to use this hex key to unthread the through axle. So that's just going to pop in there, and then get that unscrewed. And then if you didn't cut it off, there's going to be this little cardboard tube. That's just packing material, so you can toss that. And then in the brake caliper is a little orange clip, so that gets pulled out. So what that is a stop. So this is to prevent you from pulling the brake while there's no front wheel in the bike. So if you were to pull the brake right now, the pads are going to go in and get stuck, which is going to mean that you're going to have to readjust the brake in order to install the wheel. So we want to avoid doing that. So after this is removed, make sure you don't pull the front brake. All right. So let's get the wheel ready. And now with the rotor on the same side as the caliper, we're going to slide our front wheel into the fork. And then grab your through axle, slide that in there. And then again, your 6mm hex key. And then you can start tightening it up. Now again, I have the multi-tool in the long position, just like when I installed the handlebar. So this is just until you get the bolt threaded all the way in. And then once it's threaded all the way in this position, set it like an L so you can get some leverage. And then when you torque this down, you're only gonna get about 1/8 of a turn before the axle is tight enough. All right, so get that torque down. Set the multi-tool aside. And then I like to just pull the front brake, make sure everything's functioning. Spin the wheel and make sure that there's no brake rub. Pull the brake and do it a couple times. And once you confirm that the wheel is good to go and the brake's not rubbing, you're all good. Front wheel's installed. All right, so now we're going to install our pedals. So to put the pedals on, I like to flip the bike upside down, which is part of the reason why the seat's still off. I think that it makes the bike a little bit more stable to do it this way. I'm just going to rotate the bike and let it sit on the grips. So if you had the seat on the bike, it would be getting in the way right now. You can scuff the seat up by doing that. It's okay to do it that way. Just this way it's sitting on the tire. You don't scuff the seat. You don't have to worry about it. The bike's a little bit more stable. All right. And then grab your pedals. So pedals are going to be right and left specific. So on the pedal, there's an R and an L. If the stickers are missing and you can't identify it that way, on the left pedal, on these little wrench flats, there's going to be ridges on the left. That's not on the right. It's only going to be on the left pedal. Okay. So first I'm going to start with the right pedal. So go to the right crank, which is the crank with the chain on it. And I'm just going to start threading this in. So new pedals are usually a little stiff, so you can rotate the whole pedal, but I'm also still grabbing onto where a wrench would go and turning it just so I can get a couple threads in there. And then I will move to the left pedal. So left pedals are opposite threaded, which is why they're right and left specific. So instead of your typical righty-tighty, this is going to be lefty-tighty. It's going to go the opposite of what you would normally do. And then what I like to do is get over the bike like this and grab with both of my hands at the same time. And if you backpedal the bike, the pedals will thread themselves in, which just makes it a little bit faster and easier. So once they're both threaded in, you can grab that multi-tool. And then again, we're going to go back to the 6mm, the same one that we used to install the front wheel. And then I'm going to start with the right. I'm going to get this pedal set up at about this angle. Get the wrench set up in the L shape that I've been using to torque things down. And then you can actually thread it in through the back of the crank arm. If you have a wrench at home, like a normal pedal wrench, you can also grab onto the wrench flats here, but we provide the multi-tool and this works. So you can grab it by the tire. So if you grab the tire and push, you can see that the crank rotates. So what I like to do is hold the tire and hold the multi-tool and just kind of push them against each other and get that pedal as tight as you can. So pedals need to be very, very tight. So try to get it torqued as tight as you possibly can. And then get it loaded into the other pedal. And the same thing works since it's opposite threaded, the wheel still moves in the same direction. So I'm pushing with my hand that way while I'm pulling the tire. Get everything nice and tight. And that's it, pedals are installed. All right, congratulations, you're moving on to the final and easiest step of assembly, installing the seat. So no tools required for this one. So what we're gonna do is grab our seat, go and open up your seat post clamp, so it's just a lever, and slide the seat post in. Now it's worth mentioning that on the seat post there is this line that's a minimum insertion mark. So make sure that that line is inside of the frame. If that is out because you need the seat up that high, the bike is dangerous to ride. You can fall off, you can get hurt, you can damage the bike. So make sure that the insertion mark is inside of the frame. So we're going to slide that in there. And then a general rule of thumb when you're setting seat height is just that you have the seat level with your hip. So it's just a good starting point. So I've got it about my hip. And then I'm going to make sure that the nose of the saddle is straight with the frame before I tighten it. Close my quick release and then just make sure that the seat doesn't twist around so I can get a little bit of movement out of this one. So if you need to tighten it up, on the opposite side of the clamp is the lever, is a little nut. You can just turn it. If it's too tight and you can't close it, just loosen it. And it's just balancing it to make sure that it's tight enough to get it closed, but also not so tight to where like you can't get it to move around. All right, make sure the seat is nice and tight. And that's it. So assembly is done. Before you go out and ride, and this is any time you ride, you should always do a quick safety check on the bike. So make sure that there's air in the tires, that the nuts and bolts are tight, that the brakes are functioning. So make sure the handlebar doesn't twist. So you have the multi-tool. You can go through almost your entire bike with just that one tool. So always just make sure that you're nice and safe. Okay, just go out, enjoy your bike, and thank you for buying an Eaglebear.